Hi, welcome to Amplify, the podcast for accounting marketers. I'm your host, Mike Jones, CEO and Managing Partner of Resound, a brand consultancy for B2B professional services. And today, I am super excited to dive into the topic of employee retention. I know this is a really hot topic for everybody in the world, it seems like, but especially in the accounting world right now. And I've got an amazing guest, Mark Horstman. I'm a longtime fan of Mark's. So full disclosure right up front. He is a co-founder of Manager Tools, a management consulting and training company. And he's also, as I religiously listen to his podcast, he's got co-host of one of my favorite business podcasts, which is the Manager Tools podcast. You can look that up on all your favorite podcast directories. And apparently I'm not the only one, Mark, because I found out from you 3 million downloads a month for this podcast.
Yeah. Overall, Mike, we've got 3 podcasts now: Career Tools,
Yes,
which is for non-managers; Manager Tools, which is obviously for managers; and now Executive Tools, although that's a paid cast.
Yep.
We have been downloaded. Manager Tools and Career Tools have been downloaded over 250 million times.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but to be fair, we've been doing it for
You have been doing it a
17
while.
years. So
Yes.
we started it a long time ago when
Yes.
I was young.
And also, to be fair, the content is amazing. So it should be downloaded, that many times.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I will tell you that we started it. Mike and I started it. My business partner, Michael Ozan, and I started it after I sold my first company and basically retired. And he said, we have to do this and we have to do a podcast and so on. And the reason why, he had been a client when he was an executive. And he said, this is the stuff that everybody wants, but is not popular. People don't talk about it. So we're doing a podcast that we would want if we were a manager. And of course we have our own company and we're managers, but yeah, that we do this. We talk about the stuff that we wanted, but didn't have, because we're much older than you. When I was in the Army, West Point didn't teach me this. The Army didn't teach me this. Procter & Gamble didn't teach me this stuff. I didn't start learning this stuff until I started my own management consulting firm. So yeah,
That's awesome.
I'm glad it's useful for you.
Yeah, I've definitely benefited from it. And I know many people have as well. So I was excited to get you on here and talk about some of these things that you've learned over the years and that you teach. And just for full disclosure for people, you've got a couple books. I highly recommend The Effective Manager. Probably find that on Amazon. 50,000 copies sold. So yeah, again, an effective book beyond being helpful for effective managers. So Mark, thanks for coming on. I want to jump right in. Let's talk about employee retention, because this is such a huge topic right now, especially in the world that I think every business is living in, where keeping people is becoming really almost job number one. I'm hearing like every client I work with this is what they want to talk about, right? Even from on the marketing side of their business, they're like, how do we recruit and retain? Even more so than maybe even finding customers, which is crazy to me. But why is that so important? Why is retention so critical for businesses?
Yeah. So a couple of reasons. One, the opposite of retention is expensive. So retention is good. Now, look, here's the problem. If you go out and you look at the journal, Wall Street Journal, you look at Harvard Business Review, you do a bunch of blog searches, HR posts and so on. Most of the stuff you can get online in the world today about management is crap. And they're trying to solve this problem of retention issues today. And so they're saying, well, you need to do this or that. You need to do this for your people or that for your people. There was an article in the journal recently in which one guy said, I really think that one of the things that's going to make a difference for retention companies is those who do holiday parties well. Now, if you believe that, you're an idiot. You're just an absolute idiot. Retention is a bit like wellness, okay? You don't retain people by responding to people leaving. You don't retain people by countering offers they get somewhere else. That's like surgery. And look, everything we know about health says, if you really want to lower your healthcare costs, stay healthy, eat right, work out, don't drink, don't smoke, all that stuff, right? And it's amazing to me that all of these, everybody wants a silver bullet. What can I do right now? I've got a retention problem. Well, the horse is already out of the barn at that point. So retention is hugely important because, again, it's the opposite of it is expensive. Another thing that's problem with lack of retention is productivity. But let me go back to cost for a minute. If people don't know this, but our economic success in the world, capitalism's great success in lifting billions of people out of poverty, is a function of productivity. Now, productivity is not what you can read today in the news about people working from home and saying, I feel productive. The fact that someone feels productive at home is good. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
But that's not productivity. Productivity is delivering to the organization's requirements, the organization's goals, leading to profitability. In fact, most companies privately don't share their productivity numbers, but they do know that productivity, individual productivity aggregated across the entire organization, is the best predictor of profitability of firms. Now, in case you have some listeners, now you're accountant folks, so you should know this, but just in case, let's not have a discussion about how profitability is a four-letter word. Profitability is not why companies exist. Okay. Companies exist to serve the society outside of them. All results in organizations occur outside of your organization. Everything internally is a cost. And people get upset about, well, all you're measuring is productivity. Heck no, we measure all kinds of things. We do need profitability in order to fund our investment in more service to more people.
Yep.
And we have to do it, provide a product or service in such a way that it's enticing to people, that they feel they're getting more than they're paying for. So productivity is super important for companies. They're maniacal about it privately, but you're not going to be productive if you're constantly turning over people. You have open positions, which have zero productivity. You then have managers having to go out and spend time hiring. And the average manager doesn't know his head from a bowling ball when it comes to hiring. They just literally, they've never been trained. Many people, it's a classic logic fail to say, well, I've been interviewed, so therefore I'll be a good interviewer. So that's
I've watched NBA basketball, so therefore I can be an NBA basketball player.
You look just like Michael Jordan to me. I mean, LeBron James, totally. So the cost to the company of a loss of an employee in terms of productive hours, in terms of the time it takes the manager to hire, and then of course rehire when they don't do a good job. And that's why my other book, you mentioned The Effective Manager, my second book is The Effective Hiring Manager, about how to hire. And it's, if you like highfalutin books with lots of fancy words, that's not the book for you. This book is about do this and then do this and then do this. Here are the questions to ask in an interview. Here's how to ask them. Here's how to evaluate the answers and so on. Then you've also got to train people. It's amazing to me that companies are decrying the less prepared people of today that they're hiring. That's okay, fine. That's the way the world is. Figure out how to train them. But if you're training people, then you'll speed up when they get to productivity, but you could have avoided all that if you'd retained the people you have. So cost is a huge part of retention. I already mentioned productivity, but the other thing is culture. If you hire well, if you hire ethical people who are responsible and pleasant to be around and productive, they will attract other productive, ethical, responsible, friendly people. And your culture will be one that is productive and responsible and ethical and friendly. And you wouldn't want to go much more than that in terms of culture, results being the first one, productivity being the most important thing. Because if you have a warm, friendly, personable, caring culture and you don't succeed, that's not a sustainable culture. We need a sustainable culture. So when you think about it, all this talk in the world today about sustainability, how could you possibly run a company that doesn't retain its people? It's literally the first thing you would do to maintain sustainability in your organization. All the training you would spend, all the time you would spend developing somebody, and then they leave, that's all lost. It's incredible. So you've read the book, and so you know, and if you've listened to our podcast, you know the two primary responsibilities of every manager. And now I'm not talking about frontline managers. I'm talking about managers and senior managers, directors, senior directors, junior VPs, assistant VPs, VPs, SVPs, EVPs, even CEO. Their two responsibilities are, in this order, results and retention. You must get results. The short way to say that is you must get results in a sustainable way. You can't, and the classic example is 150 years ago, 200 years ago, when companies first started, managers were told, when manager was first invented, most people don't know this, in textile mills in Scotland, the manager was told by the owner, who had previously been in the mill, and now he was, I hate to say it, but a white guy with privilege. He wanted to get out of the dirty, filthy factory. And so he hired a manager, and he told him, all I care about is results. And what happened was tyranny. If you tell anybody, all you have to do is look at the Stanford prison experiment, which is a famous sociological, psychological study. If you give people power and you don't teach them about their responsibility, you're going to get tyranny pretty quickly. And it's funny, 6 months after the formation of the first management jobs in the world, formal management jobs in modern organizations, not designed by royalty, not designed by kings and Mesopotamia and so on. Within 6 months of the formation of managers, unions started. If you ever wondered about chicken and the egg, management came first and then right after unions, because they realized, they said, you may be stronger than me, but you're not stronger than we. And so they banded together. The only thing they could do is a reasonable response. So managers have to achieve their results in a sustainable way. So the two things we measure are results and retention. So if you're a person who likes to crack the whip and you get good results for a short while, and there's an exception for this on Wall Street because the money is there so sick that they ignore retention, although they do pay their folks a great deal of money. If you're someone who only gets results, pretty soon you're going to be gotten rid of. Peter Drucker teaches us, the smartest guy about management in the world, teaches us there's two reasons to fire somebody: they fail to do their job, or in some way they tear down the team. There's been a couple articles recently in HBR, Harvard Business Review, about why we should fire the toxic high performers, because we think this high performer, we can't do without him or her. Well, yeah, you can, because he's suppressing everybody else's performance as well. So retention is hugely important. It's the second most important thing a manager does. And sadly, most companies will not share retention data internally with the company. They should. We recommend it when I go in and consult them. I said to share it with everybody, give them their retention numbers for every quarter, so that and base their performance bonuses on it, because turnover, as I say, is expensive.
So I think that leads to kind of the next question, which is, okay, before we get to how to retain people, what is happening right now in organizations where people are quitting, right? Like, what is it they're not doing or that they are doing that's pushing people out?
Yeah. So you mentioned, when we were talking about this before, about the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation is a load of crap.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah, it is. Look, it's a great title. Whoever came up with it deserves a marketing award. But it's false. Okay. A bunch of people, when COVID hit, were very close to retirement, and they did what many sane, logical people did, and said, what is going to be the impact of my retirement if I retire now? Because I don't want to do what I'm having to do now. This is miserable. And so they
quit.
Yeah.
Yep. Retired, really.
Yeah.
Not quit.
So calling it Great Resignation, when that is a significant percentage of the people that are not in the workforce, is misleading. It lumps everything, all the reasons why people choose to leave, into the same thing of a resignation. A resignation implies I leave your company and go somewhere else. The second thing is, there are a number of people who are not working. The number of people working in America, percentage-wise, I think has never been lower, in part because of the necessity, in some cases, the overabundance of government support. When your restaurant that you own for 30 years goes out of business, it's appropriate for the government to do something for those people, because, of course, it was governmental responses to the pandemic. It wasn't the pandemic that caused people to lose their jobs. It certainly caused a lot of deaths, and it's a great sadness, and will always be a great sadness in our lives. But in terms of the economic piece of it, it was the government responses and the lockdowns and the restrictions on free trade and capitalism that caused such disruptions. And so, if you're a waiter, if you're a maitre d', or if you're a cook in a restaurant that's gone out of business, you're going to cut your expenses to the bone in your household, and you're going to hopefully get some government support. And that government support has allowed a lot of people to not work, which is a completely legitimate decision for them to make. So that's part of it as well. also there's sort of a divide in the world between people who have to be at work to do their job, and then many people who I think the vast majority of business writing is about, those people who have jobs like you and I who can work from home.
Yep.
And I think there's a divide there that causes all of this to be lumped into the Great Resignation that I think is misleading. That said, when the market is suddenly, there are a lot of open positions, companies use normal economic thinking to say, how do we fill our positions? We're not filling them as well. Guess what? We're going to pay more money.
Yep.
Right? When the demand is greater than the supply, the price goes up. This is old news, except for Veblen goods and so on. And so there was a relative amount of dissatisfaction with working conditions for various reasons, and there was more money to be had somewhere else. Now, this is particularly interesting in my opinion, because historically, if you go back 50 or 60 years, many people, there was a healthy percentage of people, not as many as people say, I've looked at the data, they stayed with one company for a very, very long time. The thinking about that has changed among a lot of younger people, and I think appropriately so. And they say, well, I want to jump around. Now, we have a podcast about the danger of jumping around, because at some point you'll be seen as somebody who jumps around. And if we want you to progress with us for the next 5 to 7 years, we don't want to invest in you. We don't want to pay you a VP salary and have you be part of the top 100 people in the company and then have you leave after 2 or 3 years because somebody else wants to hire you to be a CEO. Yep. By the way, it's almost always a bad idea to go from being a VP at one place to CEO at another place. It's bad for the hiring company and it's bad for the individual. Most people don't know how hard that move is. But there are all kinds of reasons in our lives. I mean, look, and think about it this way. Okay, I can live anywhere I want because I can do my job by Zoom. I want to move back to where I grew up. And now I'm close to my family. And so now, okay, you say you want me to come back to the office. I literally cannot. I'm in St. Louis. I went to WashU. I live on Italian Hill. And I can't come back to my Silicon Valley employer. And so that adds to it as well. You don't take the kind of disruption that the employment and economic and capitalistic world took over the last 2 years and not have a bunch of people reassess. I do hope, by the way, for those folks who are listening, I do hope that the one thing that nobody's talking about, but I really hope that people are doing, is they're learning about our guidance for those times when you have career disruptions that are not of your own making. And that is, start saving money. We say you ought to have 6 months. I think we're going to upgrade that to 9 months or a year. We may have already done that in a podcast, because you don't want to be, one of my rules about career moves is only make moves when you want to, not when the company wants you to.
Yep.
Right. So if there's suddenly a layoff, and I think what's going to happen in the next couple of years, we're going to have some overhiring. We're going to throw money at people. Then we're going to discover,
don't really need all these people.
Numbers are out of that. And boy, it's first in, first out in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I'll also say this, and this is right in my wheelhouse. People quit because their manager's an idiot.
Yep.
Now, she means well, he means well, but they don't know how to manage. When I was at school, they made me build a bridge. I'm a mechanical engineer. They made me build a bridge before they allowed me to graduate with a mechanical engineering degree. They didn't just make me show that I could do equations to do a bridge, which are fairly straightforward, and you can have a book open when you do that. You actually have to build it. And the test I had to take was, go out in the middle of a field, and there's a trench across the field, and a whole big pile of lumber, and a whole bunch of fasteners, and 4 Army engineering soldiers, and a truck. And they said, cadet, you have all day to build a bridge, to design a bridge, instruct these gentlemen how to build a bridge. You can't help them build it. And then you're going to get in your truck and drive across your bridge. Well, you learn whether or not a guy knows something about building a bridge that way.
Yep.
But when people get promoted to management, they get handed a stack of personnel folders and say, your team's over there. And they don't teach them anything. The paucity of management training is horrendous. Look, if we hire somebody for a software developer, We make them do code on a whiteboard to prove that they can code. You don't just, well, I think this person will be a good coder. No, that's not how it works. So managers don't know what they're doing. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're blithely ignoring it. People are genuinely fearful. I think that's why we've been downloaded 250 million times. They're fearful. They don't know what to do as a manager. And so we get all of these things that suggest, well, if you do this, that'll help. You should have better holiday parties, or you should really show appreciation for people. But there's a lot of clumsiness about how people show appreciation. Some people say, well, if I want to show appreciation, I'll just send an email to somebody and tell them I really appreciate what they did. Well, unfortunately, human beings aren't that simple. And so people quit because their boss isn't doing a good job. And most managers don't realize that they are the company. The vast majority of people's experience with their organization, let's say you're at Facebook or Apple or Google. If I'm an individual contributor at Facebook, Apple, or Google, my experience with Facebook, Apple, and Google, or Amazon, or SpaceX, or Tesla, and we've all worked at all those companies and many more, my experience with that organization is largely filtered through the manager. The manager becomes the company. Most managers don't want to think that way, but it's been true ever since vertical structures got invented by the military, by the way, in case you want to know. So managers don't know what they're doing. And these are good people. They care about doing well, but I hate to say this, it's going to sound very arrogant, and I hate to do it this way, but nobody's teaching it except us. And we have a boatload of data. As you know, you've listened. I gathered data about managers for close to 20 years, and we know what works and we know what doesn't work. And it's not what I would have taught when I first started. I didn't know, but the data are pretty clear that the most important thing you can do to keep people is to build trust. If you're my boss, Mike, and my trust score with you is 4 or lower, you're in trouble. I'm a retention risk. Now people ask, okay, well, how do I measure trust? That's easy. Send out a pulse survey and ask your people on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust your boss? By the way, everybody's like, well, my people trust me. So, well, no, we're not going to measure you based on what you think your people will say. We're going to ask your people what they say. And companies don't do that very often. They're frankly worried about it.
Yeah, they're probably afraid of it.
And you can go even further than that. Sociology and psychology have already taught us what it takes to build trust. All human beings build trust the same way. And now I'm going to assume that the manager is a trustworthy person, which is a good assumption for the vast majority of people in the world. So we have a trustworthy person who doesn't know what he or she should be doing. She accepts, I need to build trust with my people. What should I do? Well, if you want to build trust with someone else, you need to talk to them more frequently about things that are important to them. That's what sociology and psychology teaches us. It's been true for 10,000 years.
It can't be that simple, Mark.
Yes, it can. Well, you say it's simple, but it's diabolically complex to somebody who's not a natural people person.
The implementation is difficult.
Right. That's why our company and our podcast is called Manager Tools, because once we discovered that, we started trying different tools that would improve the trust, which would lead to higher productivity, which would lead to more success. And it became very straightforward that the single best tool we could ever come up with, I'm not saying there's not a better one, but nobody's invented it yet, is a one-on-one, a weekly half hour where the manager sits down with his or her direct. The direct gets to go first. So simplified, it's 15 minutes for the direct and 15 minutes for the manager. And during the first 15 minutes, the manager takes notes and asks questions about things that the direct brings to the table. Now, the vast majority of managers think, well, that won't work. I talk to my people all the time. Yeah, you really don't know what you're talking about. It's amazing to me. People who have never tried something and they say, well, that won't work. Well, how would you know? You've never done it. And so what you do is you start sitting down with your people once a week. No single one-on-one matters, but it is the pattern. It is saying to your people every week, you're going to have time with me. I'm not going to leave you behind. You're going to have a voice with me every week. You can come and talk about whatever you want. You can talk about work. You can talk to family. You can talk about your weekend. You can talk about your hobbies, anything you want. It's up to you. Now, in case people are worried, gee, I don't want to listen to my people talk about their families for 15 minutes every week. Okay, fine. Don't worry about that. Our data show that 79% of direct's time in one-on-ones, we measured something like 17,000 managers one-on-ones over the course of many months. And we discovered 79% of the time the directs want to talk about work.
Yep.
And managers end up wanting to talk about work slightly higher than the directs, about 86% of the time. So the vast majority of discussions that you have in one-on-ones, 80%, roughly 80 to 85% is about work, which is the connection between me and you if you're my boss anyway. That is, managers think that everybody comes to me and says, I need to learn how to talk to my people about performance. And we have a way to do that too. A feedback model works quite well. But they seem to think that what they need is a silver bullet about performance. They're wrong. Because if I don't trust you, a lot of your performance communications to me go awry.
Yep.
So the silver bullet is trust, and the tool to achieve it is one-on-ones.
I love it.
That's what we're known for.
Yep. And I'll attest, I'll plug it, testimonial. I mean, our team has so benefited just from one-on-ones.
Yeah.
When I picked up the book and I started listening to Manager Tools podcast, I knew very quickly that's the easiest low-hanging fruit for our team.
Right.
It was just get in this pattern and start doing it. And we didn't even touch feedback. We didn't touch coaching. We didn't touch delegation for at least, I think a year and a half.
Yeah.
And we just did one-on-ones, and we immediately saw tremendous improvement. I will caution some people that it'll reveal where there's, non-fits, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a hiring problem.
And that's we had hired people that needed to leave, and this will accelerate that process.
Yeah.
But with people that are good fits that you've hired in well, I can't speak highly enough of just that tool in and of itself. And there's lots to be gained from other tools, but
we have
huge.
There are actually 4 tools that we teach that are sort of the core, and we have data to support all that. One-on-ones, feedback, coaching, and delegation. And one-on-ones are the big mover. If you do one-on-ones and you build your trust, I promise you, your people will start asking for more performance communications. When I say that in front of a group of managers that we're training, I don't do much training anymore. We have other people doing that nowadays. But when I say to them, your people will come to you and ask you because they trust you to give them candid performance feedback. Anybody ever done that with you before? No. Well, okay, they will. They will when they start trusting you. That's the problem, is they don't trust you yet. And frankly, they fear you a little bit because you have willpower. I'd like to joke that you control their addiction to food, clothing, and shelter.
Yep.
I know which group of people in the world hates managers the most, and that's the spouses of their direct reports. And to be clear, I'm an engineer. We have data on that.
I love it, Mark. This is exactly what I was hoping for from this conversation. And I think these are some really helpful insights, but also just some practical steps that people can start taking. Yeah. And, I think every accounting firm that I know can benefit from these things, no matter even if they're already doing one-on-ones, and how can they improve those? How can they make them better? That consistency. I remember, reading the book, and one of the first things that really jumped out at me was the data that you had around the frequency, and how, a weekly one-on-one, even just the whole story about, like, you had, in your test group, and I'll let you tell it actually.
Yeah. So it's a great story. We didn't know when we started gathering this data in the early 1990s, what we would find. And then we started gathering the data, and we didn't believe it for a while, frankly. So we decided to do one-on-ones. The very first one-on-ones we taught, we actually had the manager go first. It was a disaster. And by the way, folks, if you're doing one-on-ones with your people and you're bogarting the meeting, or you're Bigfooting the meeting at the start and saying, hey, I know this is a one-on-one, but I got to cover this other stuff with you. Don't do that. That's a complete abomination of what one-on-ones are about. You can set the tone and the content of any conversation you have with your directs at any moment. If you start studying your direct conversations with you, you'll discover you set the topic every single time, except in one-on-ones. You got to let them come to you first. But so we started teaching one-on-ones. The manager went first and the direct went second. And we guessed that a week would be the right periodicity or frequency. And so we did a test. Now, we didn't know that we were right. There was a lot of data to support weekly in terms of people's memories and the operational tempo, which was called op tempo in my work. And so we tested biweekly, which means twice a week. Weekly, we also tested biweekly, which means fortnightly, every other week. And we tested monthly. And in every single test we did, we compared it to a control group who were not allowed to do one-on-ones. In the first time we did it, we had 1,100 managers, 700 managers doing one-on-ones, some weekly, some bi-weekly, fortnightly, and some monthly, and then a control group, not allowed to do one-on-ones at all. We were supposed to run that for 2.5 years. We only got to run it for 19 months because 18 months into it, unrelated to our work, HR put out a list of people who had gotten promoted in the previous 18 months from manager to senior manager to director, or what have you. And 42 of the 43 people in this large organization that had gotten promoted in the previous 18 months were in the group that were doing one-on-ones, weekly or bi-weekly. So pretty soon what happened was the control group started doing one-on-ones.
It revolted.
Which is really bad for gathering data. It's really bad for data analytics.
It ruined your test.
Stop the test. But there were some, but after 18 months, we had a pretty good data set. And by the way, when people ask, well, how did you measure the effectiveness? Well, that was easy. We interviewed every single manager, all 1,100 of them, before we started, and we found out what their results were supposed to be and what their retention was. And then we compared their results and retention after 18 months, actually after a year and after 18 months. Those are the two key things that managers do, results and retention. We compared it for each individual manager. We didn't put some generalized thing about how people feel on top of it and said, people feel better. Yeah, we don't care about feelings. I mean, we do care about individuals, but the organization doesn't really care.
You can't measure feelings.
No, you can't. And so we got this data back, and there was very clearly 4 spikes on the graph. The number one group, the group that got the biggest improvement in results and retention, did weekly one-on-ones. The group that came in second did bi-weekly one-on-ones. By the way, they only got about 40% of the improvement, which is interesting because they spent 50% of the time, but they got 40% of the improvements. And we've seen that come true 6 or 7 times since then. Bi-weekly one-on-ones are useful, but they're not nearly as efficient as one-on-ones, weekly one-on-ones. And then the third group was the control group, which had no change in results and retention. The group that came in last, the first 3 times we tested it, was the monthly one-on-ones. So now we have a podcast. I think it's called Don't Do Monthly One-on-Ones, because in every single time, the first 3 times we did large scale studies like this, and we've done close to 20 of them now over the last 25, 30 years. In every single case, we did weekly and bi-weekly, and then we did monthly for the first 3, but only for the first 3, because after 3, every single time monthly came in lower than the control group, meaning results and retention went down if you did monthly one-on-ones. And the reason for that, so we ethically, we had to stop even testing monthly one-on-ones. But monthly one-on-ones, I don't care if you do them 5 times a week or 6 times a week or 1 time a week or 1 time a month. All I want to know is, what are the results to the organization? That should be the standard. And the standard is very clear. Weekly is way better. Now, there are some people who are listening right now who say, I don't have time. I'm going to tell you I'm going to give you a tool to help you with that. And then I'm going to tell you a very quick story. Actually, I'll tell you the story first. I taught 2 US presidents, President Bush, the younger, and President Clinton, to do one-on-ones. They both did one-on-ones with their senior staff. For the last 7 years, they were in the White House. I'm sorry, folks. The president is busy. You are not. You're not even close to being busy. We had at one point 86 CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies doing one-on-ones our way. CEOs are busy. You're not. Okay. Yep. Now, you say you're busy, and I would say, yeah, you probably are, but only because your day is full. Actually, really, it's more just inefficient, and that's okay. A lot of people, we're all inefficient in our own way. But here's the clue that will help you understand how you have plenty of time to do one-on-ones. You're busy this week, and you're probably have a pretty good idea that you're kind of busy next week. If you try to start one-on-ones this week and you go to your people and say, we're going to start doing one-on-ones, they're all going to revolt. Yep. First of all, because they don't like change coming from somebody who has power over them. And secondly, because their calendars are full too. So, and this is true not just for one-on-ones, but for any management initiative you ever put in place for the rest of your career. It's so easy. You are busy now, but 5 weeks from now, your calendar is a desert. There is nothing on it. So announce that you're going to do one-on-ones and say you're going to start 5 weeks from now, and take the time in between to brief them on what you're going to do, explain to them what you're going to do. By the way, that's the reason why one-on-ones monthly don't work, is if you tell people, I want to build trust with you, I want to get to know you better, I want a time for you to be able to talk to me, and you say, and we're going to do that once a month, no human being will believe you. They just think it's like saying, hey, I think you're nice, let's have a long distance relationship. Nobody wants that. It doesn't. There are certain human limitations, biological, emotional, psychosocial, and so on, that affect us. And we're not robots yet. So if you want to start one-on-ones, decide you're going to do it. You can get my book. You don't have to buy the book. You can listen to a series of podcasts that we put out for free 17 years ago. Whole bunch. I think we've got 60 or 70 or 80 podcasts about all the ins and outs of one-on-ones, and start doing them 5 weeks from now. Put the time on your calendar 5 weeks from now where you have nothing on your calendar. Then when that week gets close and things start vying for time on your calendar, you'll already have the most important time on your calendar already on there. And then those things that are less important will be fighting for less time. I'm going to mention one other thing about that. And that is, somebody says, well, Mark, I can't do weekly. I have 20 direct reports. And the answer to that concern is, you're right. Now, this is manager tools. It's not organizational structural tools. So if you have 20 directs, you're being screwed by your organization. It is an unfair ask. Don't ask me the right number, because there is no such thing as a right number. Everybody always says it's 6 to 8. And yes, there's a lot of white papers that say 6 to 8. They all go back to a study that was done of Navy SEALs. And no offense, we're not Navy SEALs. So the idea that 6 to 8 should apply to large corporations is ludicrous. Some people can handle as many as 10 or 12. Some people maybe need to start with 5 or 6. If your first managerial job, they give you 15 or 18, it is no wonder, if nobody's trained you, that you're going to be suffering. It's going to be miserably hard. So if you've got more than 12 directs and you just don't think you can devote, let's see, it would be 12 directs. Let's say that would be 6 hours a week. I promise you 5 weeks from now, you have 6 hours on your calendar. But if you feel like you can't do that, I would say 2 things as your friend. I would say, A, you're wrong, but that's okay. It's the most efficient time you're going to spend, and therefore the most effective. But the second thing you do is go ahead, do them bi-weekly if you've got 12. So now you're only doing 6 a week. That's only 3 hours a week. Most people don't realize it, but in a 50-hour work week, the typical
you have 3 hours.
What?
You absolutely have 3 hours.
Yeah, you absolutely have 3 hours. It's not even, people who say they don't have 3 hours, they're never going to be good at time management. And actually, of course, we have a lot of podcasts on time management too. And what we like to say is there's no such thing as time management. Your time doesn't need you to manage it. It gets along just fine without you. You have priority management. So the question is, if you had a retention problem and you look on your calendar 5 weeks from now and you see plenty of time to do one-on-ones with each of your people for the rest of your career, as long as they're with you, and you see you don't have time, you've got a prioritization problem, and you probably shouldn't be a manager. So,
That just got super practical, Mark. Thank you.
Good. That's my pleasure. We're full of practical here.
Yes, you are. Which leads to really my last question, which is, how can people find out more about you, about manager tools? How can they start getting kind of plugged in and find some more resources beyond what you've already shared, which is a lot?
Right. So obviously manager tools and career tools are free. You can get them by coming to our website where we have RSS feeds. You can also listen to them on our website. We have a free app, Manager Tools. You can find it in all the app stores. And then you can get podcasts on the app, which allows you to pause and bookmark ones that you want to come back to. You can do that. You can certainly go to all the various directories out there, Manager Tools and Career Tools. In fact, we were so popular for so long in the business category that the podcast, People's Choice Podcast Awards, which is I think the biggest one, the business category is now named the Manager Tools Business Podcast of the Year, because we won it like 6 or 7 years in a row. And they finally said, okay, you can't compete anymore. We're going to name it after
we need a new category.
We also have Executive Tools, which is available if you're a licensee of our work, which costs $200 a year. You get all kinds of other stuff. I won't bore you with all that.
It's a fantastic podcast, by the way. I'm loving it.
We do that one every other week because I have to write both Manager Tools and Executive Tools. And I'm also writing 2 other books, and I also have to put out new products and so on. And sometime soon, I'm nearly 62, I have to retire and turn it over to our successors. And we're planning for all that. So manager-tools.com is where you'll find all that. And if you come and get a free account on our website, you can use our forums, which are trafficked by like 1,000 managers a day asking questions about what do I do in this situation? What do I do in that situation? I always like to highlight every time I'm interviewed, we have a podcast called What to Do If One of Your Directs Has Body Odor, which everyone laughs at, you know, and okay, fine. It sounds a little corny, but if you're that manager and you're told by a colleague that, you know, that guy, he doesn't smell so good. And you don't,
you got to deal with it.
You could step into a pile of stuff that would just be, odorous excrement, as they say.
Yeah. And maybe that's the issue, is the pile of stuff.
And so what we did was we spent 6 years testing different speeches you could give people and discovered there was one that worked way better than the others. And so if you listen to that podcast, we'll teach you what to do, how to go through the steps, and how to have the conversation. And one of the things we're really well known for that I didn't expect to be well known for is that we actually test words, sentences, phrases, paragraphs, and so on. And so when we say brief your people on how to do one-on-ones or talk to your direct about his or her body odor, and by the way, there are a lot of good reasons why body odor is not that big a deal, but you have to handle it sensitively. With all that stuff, we tell you exactly what to say. If you're a licensee, you can download written versions of the shows, not transcripts, but actually white papers written for each show that form the basis of how we talk through the show. And you don't even have to listen to my old voice. And actually, I'll mention this. I hosted it for 17 years, I think, or 16 years. And now Mike and I have retired from the Managers Cast. We're on Executive Tools, but our successors, Kate and Sarah, Kate Braun and Sarah Sintas, who run our public conference business and our client business, have taken over the Manager Tools podcast, all part of our succession planning.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark, so much for coming on. This was a fantastic conversation.
If your audience likes it and I can come back and you have more questions, I'd love to do it. I really care about managers. I care about managers in every walk of life. If you're a marketer in an accounting firm, I don't even want to mix marketing and accounting, let alone management on top of that. It takes
a special person.
Yeah.
And I, knowing a lot of these marketing directors and marketing managers in accounting firms, they're working their tails off. They have to work with accountants all day while having their head in marketing. And that's a rare feat, I think, for many of them. They
probably need to come to the website and take our MT disc test, instrument, which will tell them that if they're a marketer, they're probably a high I. They're energetic, they're outgoing, they're friendly, they're cheerful, they're naturally, they like to go to parties and so on. And then they're going to be talking to their accountants who are high C's, who are logical, linear, rational, factual, low key, reserved, and so on. And if you're trying to persuade an accountant by being yourself and you're a marketer, you're nuts. It's not going to work. They're going to think you have three heads. And so you've got to communicate in a language that makes sense to them. And that means toning yourself down if you want to be effective and coming in with facts and sending an email in advance. Right? You don't
lots of detail.
Yeah, other people come to you. Hey, I want to bat some stuff around with you. High eyes, marketing people like, yeah, that's great. I love that. No accountant wants that. They want data and facts. And so you got to give it to them in advance. But that's a whole nother.
That's another podcast episode right there. How to communicate with your accountant partners.
And our podcast, all free. We'll teach them exactly how to do it.
Yes. I highly recommend people check that out. It's manager-tools.com. If you want to find the website, obviously everyone can look that up. Also, you can look up Manager Tools, Career Tools on their favorite podcast apps. And thank you, Mark, for coming on.
Anytime, Mike.
For all of our listeners, thank you again so much for checking in on another episode of Amplify, the podcast for accounting marketers. Thank you again for listening in. If you like this episode, I would highly recommend you give us a glowing 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. We would really appreciate it. It really helps us be found by more people. And if you want to find out more about Amplify, as well as the Association of Accounting Marketing, AIM, and all of the episodes from this podcast, head over to accountingmarketing.org. You'll find the podcast under the category of publications. If you'd like to find out more about me, my brand consultancy, Resound, head over to resoundcreative.com or just send me an email. I'm at mike@resoundcreative.com. And until next time.